Film number 23 in the Marvel Cinematic Universe, the official end of Phase 3. Endgame was not the end, this is. And the film that makes the title of Endgame a lie, Spider-Man Far From Home. Joining me as always to talk about it is Barry. Barry, it's still going. And out of interest, how do you feel watching this film after Endgame? After like the culmination of the universe, and then the universe is still going. Is there like the same level of investment for you?
Well, I feel like going in there wasn't, but afterwards I was pleasantly surprised and I was pleasantly raring to go, which I'm sure we'll talk about. But yeah, I think that's been a kind of a recurring thing as we've gone through the series is the silliness of the way they break up these phases. You know, like the with the first phase being this really perfectly paced out thing with the obvious conclusion, and then everything since then has just kind of been a bit all over the shop. But in reality, I mean, who really cares? Because they don't even really use that terminology in any kind of like in-universe way. It's pretty much just marketing speak. So what are you gonna do?
Yeah, because the end of Phase 2 was not Age of Ultron; it was Ant-Man.
Yes, of course, that wonderfully climactic film Ant-Man. Also, much like when wrestling, you know, tries to do season finales, quote unquote, there's no break between these movies, so it doesn't really matter what you call a phase and what you don't. It's like, oh, that's the end of that phase. I'll see you all again in like 6 months for the next one.
It's not even that. Like Avengers Endgame was re-released in theaters the week before Spider-Man Far From Home was out.
Yeah, we could do a whole separate podcast about how absolutely desperately they want that movie to be the highest grossing of all time. Like, to the point it's kind of comical.
And they failed. It fell short. Even on re-release it fell short, I think.
Yeah. And that's I was gung-ho about it. I was like, I'm not invested, quote unquote, but if it dethrones Avatar, I think that'll be good. I think it's a generational movie, and I think Avatar, as many people have pointed out, did not leave the cultural impact people thought it was. But as people got more and more desperate and Marvel fans were convincing themselves to keep going to the damn movies to see this thing over and over again, I was like, all right, the best conclusion to this will be this movie coming within like $5 of getting it and losing out. That will be the best conclusion. The closer it gets without overachieving is going to be the best outcome, and that looks like that's what we got.
Yeah, and the funny thing is, Disney bought Fox, so Disney just own Avatar. Disney win either way.
It's talk about like masturbatory. It's like, God Almighty. It's like that's how comically large the Disney organization is. It's having to like compete with itself to amuse itself.
And now they released the release schedule, and basically for the next 6 years, it's every Christmas it's Star Wars Avatar, isn't it?
Yeah, I think so. If those Avatar movies ever happen,
which they're not going to.
Yeah, I mean, they've been put off for so long at this stage, you know.
But less about Avatar, more about Spider-Man Far From Home, which it's a sequel to Endgame. Like, it's not just a follow-on. It is directly dealing with the effects of Endgame, which is the reason they had to kind of skirt around that in the first trailer. I'd be interested to watch that first trailer back, actually, to see is there any like hints dropped of Tony Stark being dead that they accidentally slipped in there.
Yeah, I mean that first trailer is such a. The first trailer is kind of the perfect, microcosm of the first part of this film. Because I remember watching that trailer and being like, this looks extremely boring. I was like, how on earth is this? I mean, forget about following up Endgame. How does this follow up Homecoming? I was like, this looks like forgettable story DLC in a Spider-Man game. You know what I mean? It's like it seemed super unremarkable, but yeah, obviously, equally bizarre though was like a week after Endgame came out when they put out that second trailer. Yeah, it was like, that they preface with a spoiler warning. It's like, you can just not put this trailer out for another few weeks. It's still Spider-Man. People are still going to be hyped. Yeah, what an odd web, pun intended, that Disney weaves with their bizarre spoiler culture and then segueing into that trailer.
As you said, I think this is a good film. I don't love it, but it's really a film of two halves. When Jake Gyllenhaal properly shows up, this film becomes a tremendously fun film, and before that, it's just like, yeah.
Yeah, I did love this movie as a whole when it's all said and done. But I was up until the reveal, I was very much thinking it was that movie the first trailer indicated, which is like, this is a functional movie. As a superhero film, the drama of the superhero stuff is very dry. It's very uninteresting. But even before the big reveal, I will say I still just love the dynamic of young Peter Parker and his school friends. I think even before this film kicked into high gear, it was really doing well in that department. But yeah, the second half is so strong that I was buzzing coming out of this.
And it's so nice to see these films taken out of American cities.
Yes, my God, yeah. Some fresh scenery was greatly appreciated. Not just these Marvel movies. I mean, the current superhero boom. It's nice to see any movie in this genre branch out a little bit.
Yeah, just wander Venice and Prague for most of your film, and it's going to be a little more interesting to look at than New York for the 160th time.
Yeah, or an approximation of New York, yep. or Ant-Man in like the least remarkable film ever to be set in San Francisco in terms of recognizing it as San Francisco. I believe there's hills in like one chase sequence. This was really great, and kind of they weaved the locations into the field trip nature of the movie is very fun, and it again makes these movies stand out a little bit more compared to every other superhero film. They've with this iteration of Spider-Man, they have focused so much on that aspect of the character, and I think the locations tied into it really well here.
One of my biggest critiques of like the MCU version of Peter Parker was that like they were pushing him closer and closer to being like Iron Man. And that's the thing I didn't like as much about other films, but they actually paid it off in an interesting way here, because then, when obviously Tony Stark is dead, if you haven't seen Endgame and you're listening to this review, I'm sorry, but Tony Stark is dead, and Peter Parker then is like the natural follow-up. There's the pressure on him to fill those shoes because he was Tony Stark's apprentice, and I liked the way they took something I kind of didn't like in other films, and at least did something more interesting with it in this one.
Yeah, absolutely. I was with you on that. I was the direction I was very concerned about, because I liked the dynamic between Tony and Peter, but I was concerned that they lead into just. I think they walked the line just perfectly. If I was to go one way or the other, I'd say they maybe leaned into it a bit too much in the home stretch. When we get the new suit in this movie, the obligatory new suit Spider-Man has to have every time he's in any motion picture.
You gotta sell the toys, Barry.
Literally toys and mobile skins. I mean, there's two new ones in this, and one of them is literally just for the climactic battle. I mean, it's hilarious. But that whole scene where he's forming that suit, I mean, again, it's not it's not totally shallow. I mean, it was earned, but at the end of the day, it's like, yeah, you're milking the Iron Man stuff a little bit too much. But to be fair, this is the first movie after he died, so on the one hand, you kind of have to. In a way, you kind of have to, don't you?
You can't ignore it, no. And like, the sooner they get the specter of Robert Downey Jr.'s Tony Stark off of these films, I think the better. Like, the sooner they deal with it, put it in the back pocket, maybe dig it up in, like, I don't know, 10 years with a Pepper Potts film or something when it feels new. But, like, he's dead. It was a good moment in Endgame. Let's all just collectively move on. Though it's interesting to see more of the people who would have been traditionally Iron Man guest characters kind of just shoveled over into Spider-Man. Obviously, Jon Favreau was the big one. But even, like, Colby Smulders and Nick Fury were generally, like, lumped toward Iron Man films. But now it's like, you're Spider-Man now.
Yeah, and that's kind of cool because, again, it kind of emphasizes the interconnectivity. That shouldn't be reserved just for the ensemble pieces.
You got to put Nick Fury somewhere.
Yeah, or someone alleging to be Nick Fury.
Yes.
I kind of want to talk about that before we get into the other post-credit scene. Mm-hmm. As well as being a funny reveal, I also thought that it did kind of work within the story, because I thought during the course of this movie, I was like, they're making Nick Fury look really stupid in this movie. Like, fair enough, you have your hero who's a little bit naive, and maybe they take things for granted, and especially a character like Fury who thinks he knows everything. That's fine. But I'm like, they're making him look so dumb. Yeah. He is dumb in this movie. And then it was both a punchline and also kind of a satisfying little story nugget to have him reveal as a Skrull in the end.
Because he's like the incompetent. He's kind of like the incompetent sidekick in this film. Because Peter Parker blows him off for most of the first half. Then he shows up and he's just like shoveled into the background. And basically, as you said, he's a punchline. But as it turns out, in the post-credit scene, it was revealed that he was I want to say Kree. I don't want to mix up my Marvel alien races. I think it's Kree. He was a Kree all along. And Nick Fury's in space.
Yeah, so that's the bit I didn't quite get, but I guess that's a hook. I mean, that's the point. Was it supposed to be immediately obvious? Is he like? I mean, the early punchline was that he was retired, like on a beach. But then I guess, is he still retired? I mean, is that, you know, is him in space his retirement? I don't know. Again, this is all stuff that's to hook us in.
I would imagine that's set up for the next Captain Marvel film.
I guess, yeah. I mean, that's what he was. I mean, you talked about him typically being tied to kind of Iron Man and stuff like that. I guess that is the character that makes the most logical sense for him to be prominently featured in going forward, because he was such a part of that that first Captain Marvel film. Mm-hmm. I mean, it was kind of something they under-promoted in the marketing, is that was kind of a buddy cop movie with Samuel L. Jackson. I mean, that was kind of a thing. So, I guess the next time they do a movie with her, it'll be again closely with Nick Fury as a secondary character.
Jake Gyllenhaal is the star of this film, though.
He sure is, and again, I think most people had kind of twigged that the twist was coming, just because, you know, your basic knowledge of the Mysterio character, how dry the kind of the threat in this movie seemed, and also if you're kind of looking at your watch halfway through the movie, like, this is getting wrapped up very quickly. This just doesn't make sense. I can't envision the reveal scene with anyone else. I really can't. It's so pitch perfect.
I just love the idea of him playing just a fake superhero.
Yeah.
And there's like a meta commentary on superhero films, like within that character of like, you just need to create a world level threat and then boom, we have a new Iron Man. It's like, boom, new $1 billion franchise. That's how easy it is to create Marvel movies, Barry. You just it's all smoke and mirrors.
Yeah, but it works.
It does work.
Like, you look at the absolutely insane success of Black Panther in particular, and it's just like, all right, they make it look easy,
and then everyone tries to copy them and does a very bad job.
Yeah, well, that's the other thing. Yeah.
One thing though, the big reveal, the thing from the trailers people were very interested in was Mysterio claimed, and in this film he claims he's from the multiverse, he's from an alternate universe from theirs, and obviously the rug gets pulled out from under that. He turns out he's faking it all along, but does that take the idea of a multiverse out? Are people going to be upset about that?
I think, I mean, people were ravenous for that, and I'm not, you know, claiming this is any kind of profound prediction, but saying it so plainly in the trailer, that did make me think, okay, that there's no way that's true. There's no way that's true. But also they can I to answer your question, I don't think it's off the table. I think it's absolutely something they're kind of going to have to come back to, because as they run through storylines and characters and heroes. But yeah, I think even though it was a fake out, I think it was a very intentional mentioning of that concept. Because I'm certain they're gonna visit it at some point. Were you like me in that when people did start going crazy at that the mention of that term, that the rumor mill started going, and they go, well, Tobey Maguire is definitely in this movie. He's definitely in this movie, and they're gonna have animated Miles Morales at some point, pop out, and they're gonna do a crazy. I mean, this movie has some crazy scenes, and it has some kind of trippy scenes. But some of the ideas floating around for how they were going to implement the multiverse in this movie were pretty hilarious.
You know what I actually thought? I thought, because I saw this film about 3 or 4 days after it released, so I heard hype about a very good poster end or mid-credit scene, which we'll talk about in a second. But I thought that the talk of the multiverse with talk of a very good mid-credit scene was like in the same way Into the Spider-Verse had an end credit scene where he went to see whatever future Spider-Man or whatever. I thought that might have been in here. They might have done like the Into the Spider-Verse cameo in the end credit scene.
Yeah, I was thinking that as well. Also, I feel like I've mentioned this on the podcast already. For like the third consecutive time, I worked myself into a shoot about an X-Men post-credit scene.
Like I still think it's I'm calling their bullshit, because they're like, it's going to be 5 years before there's an X-Men integration into the MCU. It's like, you you got Spider-Man rights and you made a film, shunted him into Civil War, made him a key player in Infinity War. It's like the idea that you can't put an X-Men film into production like pretty quickly is absurd. The idea that these plans are so fixed.
Yeah, they absolutely can. Yeah, and you, like you said, that's the perfect example. It's like, hey, when the Spider-Man deal got done, they made it work.
Mm-hmm. And the other talk about the multiverse was that's how they're going to explain the X-Men. That they bring them in from a different alternate universe, and that's why we've gone 23 movies without even a hint of the X-Men existing.
Yeah, that is the weird thing. As these movies trek along and enter into the 20s, is the idea that these characters of equal or greater power than like Iron Man and Thor exist, but we just kind of haven't crossed paths with them. What's up with that? At least, Wakanda's sealed away from the world and all that stuff. That's okay. And Captain Marvel's not from this planet, and that's kind of okay, I guess. Doesn't really make sense that Nick Fury wouldn't have mentioned her all those years ago, but whatever. Now it's just like, yeah, especially if you have like, because with X-Men specifically, like there's such like that universe is so different from the Marvel universe because like they obviously integrate the obvious racial undertones of those stories into those movies, and the ideas of mutants being like hated and segregated, and they go to special schools, and there's Congress debates the mutant issue and shit like that. Like, yeah, you can't kind of just have them. Oh well, here's just the character Wolverine in our world. It's like, no, he brings baggage. You get the idea that you can just act like, oh well, he's always been around. We've just never talked about it. Doesn't really work, especially as like you had Civil War there, where the whole issue is like litigation of superheroes and stuff like that. That's kind of the X-Men thing, and yet the X-Men never come up. So yeah, I do think that if they don't do a multiverse thing, it is going to be pretty tough to segue those characters in. But as you mentioned with the Spider-Man thing, they will find a way, I'm sure.
Yeah, like you can't just do the like Doctor Strange thing where it's like, oh, he only gets his powers now. It's like you can't do that with Charles Xavier.
No, of course, yeah. I mean, unless you completely rewrite the character and change it, but I don't think anyone wants that. Yeah. I'm sure they'll change it to some extent, but within reason.
Let's talk about the mid-credit scene, Barry.
Let's talk about the what?
The mid-credit scene.
Oh yes, yeah. I literally slapped my thigh with amusement at the reveal of J. Jonah Jameson.
Not just J. Jonah Jameson, also J. Jonah Jameson played by J.K. Simmons. It's the only way the universe can be.
It's like why even bother? There's tons of other great actors, I'm sure, who in a universe where we didn't have J.K. Simmons previously, I'm sure there could have been a great J. Jonah Jameson played by any number of other people. Unfortunately, we do not live in that universe. You cannot follow that performance, and it's such a. It certainly seems from its from this scene, it's kind of going to be a bit. It's going to be a bit player. Spider-Man ain't going to be working for him directly. There aren't going to be 5 scenes with him in a movie like the Raimi ones. So if you're just going to have him in this kind of context, you might as well.
Is he the first person to like go between universes and explain? I guess Lou Ferrigno technically, but that barely counts.
Yeah, I think so. Also, Doctor Strange is referenced in the Raimi movies. So YouTube fucking clickbait thumbnail fan theorists can go crazy with this one. I think it's the scene where he's coming up with a wacky name for Doc Ock, and he says Doctor Strange, and someone says it's taken. So there you go, confirmed, same universe, etc. But also, so not only J. Jonah Jameson, portrayed by J.K. Simmons, but I guess shades of the PS4 game, but they've gone with the straight up with the Alex Jones inspired version of Jameson, which, I mean, I might be showing my ignorance. I said it to my roommate who I saw the movie with, because he played the game as well, and we loved the game. I assume because it's in the game and it's also in this movie, is that what J. Jonah Jameson just is in the comics as well? I assume it's not a coincidence that both the movie and the game went in that direction.
Yeah, I was thinking about this as well. I think it's less that they made a specific choice to make the character like that, and more that's just how we see. Fair enough, they use the word fake news, and when they do that, they're obviously trying to trigger something in your mind. But I think in general that character skews close to that, like sort of spread misinformation about Spider-Man. If Spider-Man's a menace, he's conspiratorial about what Spider-Man, who Spider-Man is, and what his intentions are. Like that's always been the character. And I think just putting that in the world in 2019 kind of naturally drags it toward what we see in the world right now, which is crazy lunatics spouting nonsense, most of which is untrue.
Yeah, and also I think prior to the credit scene, there's an allusion to that in the climactic Mysterio scene where he literally says people will believe anything these days. There was a very kind of, in a fairly interesting way, there was a very kind of fake newsy kind of permutation to the Mysterio character throughout.
Yeah, there's a lot of perception and reality stuff that they're playing with.
Yeah, including the big reveal scene, which we've talked about. Which, you know, I don't know who could possibly be listening to this that wouldn't know what we're talking about. But, you know, the scene where he drops the charade and reveals not only that it is a charade, but also why he's doing it. This whole idea that so much of Tony Stark's, stuff is kind of pilfered and, you know, underappreciated hard workers underneath him, but his perception was that he was the boy genius and so on. You know, that's these movies don't have a ton of subtext generally, which is a shame. We talked about Civil War there earlier. I mean, that whole thing is so paltry compared to like especially the first X-Men movie. Like it's you know, again, not that this is some kind of grandiose political satire for our era. It's not. But you know, it's in there. It's got its little barbs, and I think they're decently well done, and it's you know, again, mildly interesting along with all the typical superhero shenanigans.
Also, the other half of that mid-credit scene, aside from the cameo, sets up the sequel in that Mysterio basically reveals who Spider-Man is and said he killed him on the bridge in London, and it sets up like Spider-Man versus the world for the next Spider-Man film, which I think is a pretty interesting direction.
It is. It's super interesting, and it's a great way. I mean, we talked about Gyllenhaal. They really did. I can't remember the last character who was done so right by a movie as Mysterio in this one. I mean, they did it at a level of justice that really exceeded my expectations, because I didn't really think of Mysterio as a movie-carrying villain. I really didn't. And not only did they do that during the typical runtime beginning and end of the film, but with that post-credit scene, they've kind of made him into one of Spider-Man's great rivals in this universe by creating this ripple effect that obviously we'll see how it plays out. But that's great. And it's like, you and I talked about how great Michael Keaton is in Homecoming. I love that performance. I think that character is great. But I think they crafted this great character, and then they just stuck some metal wings on him and called him Vulture.
Yep.
Right? Whereas this is Mysterio. They made a Mysterio movie with a great Mysterio performance, a great Mysterio character portrayed by a fantastic actor, and they gave it more teeth than I could have possibly imagined. I mean, that's kind of one of the more pleasant surprises of the whole movie, is just how right and how significant they made that character.
And they had a big like Mysterio fight scene at the end of basically the second act, where Peter Parker is like running through a building and the building is warping and changing, and it says Mysterio changes his perception of reality. It's really it's up there with like the best stuff from Doctor Strange, or like the small fight scenes from Ant-Man. It's really good stuff.
It's great. I love that. That's when the movie had already kicked up a gear for me at that point. I think once you're really off to the races, once you get the Mysterio reveal, and so I was already well into it. But God, and it's quite long as well. I mean, once that scene kicks off, it's really it really gets going. But God, it's fantastic. Conceptually, it's really cool, and execution wise, it's just fantastic. It's I think that's part of why I was so high on it. Was this was a movie where I came out where I have particular scenes that are going to stick with me in you know, a couple of years when we're all recapping the MCU and all what stands out to you. I mean, it's going to be up there as a specific scene that stands out. Just so well done. Kind of reminded me a little bit of, you know, again, really mind blowing at the time, the Scarecrow sequences in the Batman Arkham game. I mean, when you know your kind of reality was flipped and you know, they really played with perception. Yeah, God, that scene is great, and it picks back up again in the finale, which is really cool. And also, yeah, a nice little thread through this movie, something that I didn't even really think about in prior MCU Spider-Man appearances. They emphasized the spider sense coming into its own as an ability, which is cool.
Yeah, and they like because there's like bits and pieces because like in Infinity War they're on the bus and the hairs on his arm they stand up when the alien ship comes down, which I think is like a visual reflection of the Spidey sense. But yeah, they actually explained it slowly integrating and him like understanding what it is and how it works.
Yeah, absolutely, and I thought this was the perfect movie to do that, especially in the grand finale, because they are doing this thing where his traditional senses are kind of not taken away from him, but clouded.
And then they explained the blip in this film, which I think we had that question at the end of Endgame about what about all these characters from Spider-Man? How are they all still in school? Because they all got blipped conveniently.
Conveniently enough, yeah. And also, I mean, there was some like stuff where people reappeared right back where they left. It's like, okay, if you think about that for too long, it kind of falls apart. So try not to do that.
They did have a very good gag though, where they were showing people disappearing in a basketball court and then reappearing in a basketball court, and someone gets hit in the face with a basketball, and like that's all I need. I don't need planes dropping out of the sky.
Exactly, that's the thing. Yeah, you don't want to think about that stuff too much.
No, you do not. This film made $866 million. So if you're like, oh, superhero fatigue after Endgame, nope. Which actually I think makes it the third highest grossing Spider-Man film. As obviously it's only it still has room to run, but I think the first Spider-Man film made around 880. And Spider-Man 3, the Sam Raimi one, made about 900 million. Do you know, people are like, oh, there's too many Spider-Man films. People hate Spider-Man films. All the Spider-Man films have made a collective $6 billion, Barry.
Yeah, I don't think anyone's sick of them. And certainly not after this one. The momentum coming off of this one, there's not a chance the next one's any kind of bomb, so...
So we're moving into Phase 4. Comic-Con is this weekend, and I'm pretty sure that's basically when we're going to get the reveal of like the kind of timeline of the next batch of Marvel films. Because I don't think we know some stuff, like they're making a Thor 4, they're making a Guardians 3, they're making a Black Panther 2, they're making another Captain Marvel, I believe, and a Black Widow movie. But like none of those have been like set in stone with dates and a timeline. We know none of that yet.
Yeah, they usually like to do their graphs, don't they? When they're at the end of something big, they're like, here's what we're looking at. Because they do that with Star Wars as well. They're like, here's the timeline.
Interesting. Disney have scheduled release dates on May 1st and November 6th, 2020, February 12th, May 7th, November 5th, 2021, then February 18th, May 6th, and July 29th, 2022. So those are the dates of the films we don't know what they are.
Yeah. So, and they could be any number of Marvel things. They could also be some new stuff. I mean, that's the other thing.
People reminded the world. Remember when they announced an Inhumans film and then never made it?
Yes.
The release date was like 2 weeks ago.
Oh, was it? I didn't even notice that.
The supposed Inhumans release date. So it could get stuff like that that's either announced and doesn't happen, or isn't announced and ends up happening.
Didn't they do a horrible TV show that nobody liked?
They did, and then they integrated it into Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. as well, and it was pretty well done there, in fairness.
Okay.
So,
there was also an Inhumans game on the like PS2 era.
I have no memory of this.
That was horribly... It was a fighting game, I believe.
Oh.
I think it was horribly maligned, if I remember correctly. I don't know anything about Inhumans at all, other than it has not successfully permeated outside the comic book realm so far. Well, look, I mean, we've seen Disney's Marvel go out on a limb on some stuff. I mean, it's crazy to think that like Guardians of the Galaxy is the massive cultural hit it is. Like that was not just a successful movie. That was gigantic. And I think part of what made the last two Avengers movies so successful is that Guardians way overachieved and became like this standalone thing that was massively successful that was now crossing over with Avengers. And these are, obviously they had their fan bases, but these were not majorly known characters 6 years ago.
And the same goes for Black Panther, really.
Same goes for Black Panther, yeah, and like we said, that again, not just a success, that was a gargantuan success. I mean, that was so huge. So yeah, I mean, it's like, how deep are they going to go? I mean, I feel like they could literally reboot Howard the Duck at this point and get away with it. I mean, they got that they've used that character, so stranger things have happened.
So yeah, we'll be back eventually for a film that we don't know. As I said, we'll probably know by the end of the weekend. We'll probably know by the end of Comic-Con.
Do you want to take a guess? What do you think is next? Just the immediate next film, not any kind of long-term prediction.
What do I think isn't? It's not Guardians, because we know that's not shooting. Thor feels a little wild. I think I'm going to say Doctor Strange 2 is next.
I asked that question. I honestly didn't even have an answer prepared. I think that's as solid a guess as you could get. Doctor Strange 2, because it's a minor enough character. You know, it's a good way to kind of ease back into things. Trying to think who else it could be. It's probably too soon. Is it too soon? If we're thinking May next, we would know if it was that Scarlett Johansson movie. I guess not. I honestly don't know. This is tough. Obviously, we had the announcement there, earlier in the week that Taika Waititi is doing Thor 4, which is good, but I don't think that's in the immediate future.
And they delayed Akira for him to do it, so.
So yes, yeah. Which, to be honest, I mean, God bless him, he's a great director. That just seemed like the weirdest mix. I'm not going crazy for that. I'll let them take their time with that movie. Yeah, I don't know. I think Doctor Strange 2 is actually a pretty solid bet.
Last Doctor Strange was 2016. Like, it could be Black Panther 2, but that was 2018, and 2 years turnaround. It's not like 2 years turnaround isn't unheard of, but I think they usually like a 3-year gap between their biggins.
Yeah, and that's the thing. That is going to be a huge one.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think Doctor Strange 2 is actually a really solid get, unless there's some really quiet, under the radar C tier character that they're hoping might be a little cheap hit that might come out in the meantime. I feel like that's something I would kind of like to see as this universe chugs on. I could do with some more fun, smaller movies that don't necessarily tie into the broader universe. In the same way, I realize it doesn't tie in because the universe is basically kaput, but like Shazam, that was a fun movie that was its own thing, and it had very basic, just kind of tokenistic ties into the rest of the universe, which, as I said, is kind of in disarray, and it's not really a thing anymore. But I'd like to see something like that from Marvel. Scale back a little bit. You're going to make $1 bajillion anyway, without, get a bit weird with it, but I feel like I've said that for most of this run. But now that we're so thoroughly deep in the universe, and we've gotten so big with the scale, I'd like them to surprise me with a character I've never heard of in a different type of movie. Although I'm not holding my breath for that necessarily. Do
a Squirrel Girl film is what you're saying.
That's the exact name that just entered my head as I had that sentence. I was like, and I think if you ever were to do that, I don't think people would want to see you say, okay, well, how can we kind of blow this up a little bit and make it a big action movie that people like? It's like, no, you've got these weird characters, you've got these unique characters, you've got these characters that do not fit in the traditional mold of like an Avengers movie. Get experimental with it. But who might tell them how to make money?
Disney, they need help.
Yeah, I think they're good.
I'm thinking of the Marvel Ultimate Alliance roster. There's Elsa Bloodstone and Miss Marvel, both of whom I don't know much about, but did they put them in the game as to get you to think about who these characters are a little more before they blow them up into their own films?
That's very possible. It does feel like there is a directive with these other kind of media franchises to. It's weird because we had that Avenger video game reveal at E3, which was kind of tepidly received, and it's this weird thing where it's not a movie license game, but they quite obviously have a directive to stick to the movie roster. And I feel like that was also a massive issue with Marvel vs. Capcom Infinite. It's like, you're not using the movie license, but the cast you're allowed to use is Thor, Captain America, Iron Man, Spider-Man, Gamora, and Rocket, and you're not going to get to use Wolverine, who's a pivotal character in all the previous entries of this franchise. So I do think, there is a thing at the moment where Marvel is like, even if you're not making a movie game, if you want to work with us, use these characters we want spotlighted for our movies. That's the directive currently. So I think you might be onto something with that.
So Elsa Bloodstone, that's the next Marvel film.
Yeah, and you might trick people into thinking it ties into Frozen. So
yeah, exactly, and a Disney-owned Frozen, so they can tie it into Frozen if they want.
Yeah.
Before we go, Barry, do you have anything to plug?
Just the usual, twitter.com/thebarrylad. Thebarrylad.com is where I do various writings on various things. And also, if you want to hear more of me in the realm of podcasting, talking about some pro wrestling, you can listen to Journey Through Gorilla Island, where me and my pals are reviewing some old school PWG. If you just search Journey Through Gorilla Island in Google, you'll get our SoundCloud and our social media on there.